Well, hello everybody. I think I'm going to get started. It's 1 o'clock. We might have other people that wander in, but figure we can try to keep this on time. My name is Matthew Saunders. I am the CTO of Trellin LLC. It's a Drupal shop based in the United States, largely, although it's a distributed team across Ukraine, the United States, and Australia. It's a recent role for me. I've been there only about 3 months. Prior to that, I've worked for three different development shops, ranging from shops that did custom PHP MySQL applications to Drupal shops. If you would like to tweet anything, my Twitter handle is @Creech. If you'd like to ask questions that I might be able to answer later on, that'd be great. Or if you want to follow me, that's terrific too. So I want to talk a little bit about who I am to begin with, and sort of how I came to project management. And I think that's important because, like a lot of people in the Drupal community, it wasn't such a straightforward path. I was originally in technical theater. I was a lighting designer, and I worked as a stage manager, a number of things like that for quite a few years. And it's funny because the last time I did this presentation, I had 3 people who came to me afterwards and said, that's really weird. I worked in technical theater as well. So there seems to be some kind of predisposed disposition for people who do that kind of work to do this kind of work. I've worked in nonprofit management. I worked for a company called WESTAF, the Western States Arts Federation in Denver, for 8 years, doing technology work for them, and also managing grant programs. I marketed for a dance company. I worked in a bookstore, wine store, taught university. So there's a whole gambit of things that I engaged in before I found my way to technology. So WESTAF was the first sort of technology company that I worked for. We did custom PHP MySQL applications there. It was a distributed team of developers, and that actually has ended up being a thread across all of the work that I've done in the past. At WESTAF, near the end of my tenure there, I ended up going to Vancouver for a number of seminars that had to do with Drupal. And I started drinking the Kool-Aid at that point, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. After I completed sort of that tenure of work, I ended up working for a company called Ping Vision for a couple of years, where I built, with a great group of developers, a ton of Drupal sites, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 or 80 altogether. And that really ended up being a really great foundation for the work that I ended up doing at Examiner later on. When I finished at Ping Vision, a group of us formed a consulting company called Vintage Digital LLC, and that company currently isn't really taking new clients, but it sort of hovers along and keeps moving along as well. And then there was this giant site that people might have heard of, Examiner.com. That I was asked to shepherd the process of moving the site from Cold Fusion to Drupal 7, and move the database from Microsoft SQL to MySQL and MongoDB. MongoDB ended up being the database of record, but MySQL continued to do things like bootstrap Drupal. Most recently, I was brought onto Trellin, as I'd mentioned, and sort of this track goes all the way back to Drupal 4.6. So I've seen a number of changes to the platform over the years, although a lot of it has stayed exactly the same, at least from a UI standpoint. If you want to contact me in a variety of different ways, I'm Matthew S. on D.O. You can find me in IRC, Twitter, so forth. So I'm a cuckoo. That's the way I like to describe myself. I worked in the nonprofit industry for 8 years. Ended up finding my way to Drupal, happenstance encounter, as I'd mentioned, while in Vancouver. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I want to encourage everybody to think about when you see new people coming into the community. How many here are new new to Drupal? Okay, awesome. And have you felt like the community has been welcoming to you? That people have been friendly and have tried to make you, feel like you're part of the overall group? That's awesome. So when you're in a year or in 6 months or whatnot, when you aren't noobs anymore, and you see new people coming in, give them the same kind of experience. That's exactly what happened to me, and it transformed my my opinion of the platform, because back in 4.6 it was really pretty rough. There were things like CCK had just come into existence. Views didn't exist yet. There were a number of things that made it a harder platform to work. But the community was what really hooked me and kept me going. Something that is important also when you're, and we're going to talk about communication in a little bit, but when we're working with our clients, it's common for us to forget that we communicate in a very different way. We're communicating through technologies like Skype and IRC, and to our clients, these are really foreign. They're really odd. It's not a normal way of communicating, and that kind of thing can lead to all kinds of stress that you need to watch out for. So you might find this familiar. You might find yourself in an emotional state with a client where the client has read a little bit and they're starting to throw out Drupal modules that really aren't that good, but they're insisting that maybe this is the route that you should take when you're planning out a project. And it's a place where you find that the client is assuming that something is easy and it won't take much time, but you know that that's not true. It's a place where you wonder where you're actually going to finish a job or even start the building of that job. And it's a place where you realize suddenly that the project is constantly in flux. Requirements are changing constantly. Change is the norm. Predictability is evaporated, and it feels like the project's sand under your feet. Everybody had that experience? Yeah? So you kind of face this monster, and I don't know whether any of you have read H.P. Lovecraft, but there's a creature called Cthulhu. If you look in its face, you go insane. Sometimes that's how project management can feel. But our job is to communicate. It's to translate. It's to mediate. It's to unblock. And our job, to a large extent, is to take that chaos, turn it into calm. It's to make everybody else's job easier, and it's to make things that are complex simple. We break things down into small, bite-sized chunks so they can be executed upon. And if we're really successful, there'll be times when things look like they're running incredibly smoothly, and people on the team might say, why do we need project managers? And at that point, we have to make sure that we're not fooled by that calm. Because we're the cat herders. And we don't just herd developers and themers. We also herd stakeholders, product owners, business owners, and clients. We have to keep communication running. We have to keep our ducks in a row. And above all else, we have to keep our developers from being distracted from shiny things, our clients from being distracted from shiny things. We need to keep people on track. So how many of you, show of hands, how many of you have been in the middle of a coding sprint and you've been asked to add one tiny little thing? And the reasoning behind it is it's going to make the website so much better. You know, you get the statement. It can't take that long, right? How many of you have heard sort of the 5 lethal words? How hard can it be? Show of hands. Yeah. So to keep all of this under control requires strong communication. And it's not just strong communication across your team. It's strong communication with your clients and with everybody who might be peripheral to your team. Does anybody here know why manhole covers are really heavy and round? Right, but why are they round? Why aren't they square or rectangular or... Not a lot. Right, it can't fall into the hole. And they're heavy because it means that it can't, it's hard for it to lift. We are the manhole covers. We keep people from falling down holes, down rabbit holes, and getting hurt. And our job is to prevent ourselves, our clients, our colleagues from making mistakes that cost money and time. So I want everybody to keep in mind that project management is 90% communication. And it's setting up a framework where your team can effectively communicate with one another. And it's listening. It's listening for underlying messages, and it's listening for the unspoken message. One of the things that will happen often is a client will fundamentally not know what you're talking about. And you'll assume, oh, they haven't objected, they haven't asked questions. They must know what it is, and they must be agreeing with the direction that we're taking. Only to find 3-4 weeks later that you've gone down a precipitous, horrible path that has wasted everybody's time and the client's money. So you need to be an active listener. You need to be actively asking questions and making sure, verifying that the client actually understands what it is that you're offering. So I'm going to talk about 3 software project management methodologies. The reason I'm going to talk about 3 of them is that I've used them in my career over the last 15 years with varying degrees of success. And all of those fed into an experience that I had with Examiner, which is where most of my remarks are going to end up being structured around, that informed a process that we developed together there. So the first is Cowboy. Cowboy can be extremely unpredictable, but it's fast. It requires a great deal of trust to exist between developers and stakeholders, and it can easily lead to miscommunication of expectations. It's highly informal. It focuses on stakeholders. It can be used, like I said, in unpredictable projects, and it's excellent for rapid prototyping. So when I came to Examiner in December of 2009, I was handed a set of requirements that were like this. And I was told, we need you to go through the requirements and give us a sense of how long this project is going to take. Clearly, from the requirements, not a single person that had been writing them had ever used Drupal, let alone ever written requirements for Drupal. So I proceeded to break it down into bite-sized chunks, and I Gantt charted the entire thing out. And what I found was that we're looking at about an 18-month cycle, which, you know, when you're talking about a migration of a site that large, and not just a migration, but also redesign and so forth, is actually pretty reasonable. It was a migration that would become 7 million nodes across 15 different content types, 200,000 users that were active that needed to be moved over, a bunch of stuff like that. So I went back to the executive committee and I said, okay, so here's the plan. I've got it all out here, and it's on a giant piece of paper, and we can talk through it. And what I was told was, oh, no, you don't understand. We've got 7 to 9 months to get this done. And I just sort of went, oh, all right, well, there's only one way I know how to do this then, with the time period that we've got. We've got to throw all these requirements away. We've got to talk about your basic business needs, and then you've got to trust that me and the team, that we're going to give you what you need, but not necessarily what you expected. Fortunately, the executive team was open to that, and we went into a period of time of rapidly iterating. Sometimes the iterations were as short as half a day. So we'd write code, and then we'd turn around and sit down with a product manager and say, does this look right? And we would do that over and over and over again. And in fact, certain portions of the design weren't completed until we literally were on the last day of development prior to launching the site. In situations like that, Cowboy can be quite effective, but the challenge is that it puts the stakeholders in a place where they feel really out of control. And they are. At that point, they have very little control on how the project moves forward. So what that meant was, at the end of that 7 to 9 months, they were like, we need predictability. And so we moved into more of a waterfall kind of methodology at that point. And what that means is that you're sacrificing speed for predictability. It was much, much slower. Everything was having to be defined up front. And again, we were in a situation where the project management team was teaching the product team how to write requirements for Drupal because they simply weren't used to that. And that ended up not being so successful. And the reason was that the executive team had gotten used to things happening really, really fast. How many folks here have worked with Waterfall, with the Waterfall methodology? Yeah, most of you. That's cool. And how many of you, in another show of hands, how many of you have actually had a Waterfall project where the scope didn't change? Ken, that's impressive. So I would maintain that Waterfall in its purest state, it doesn't exist, except for Ken, because he's a hard ass. And the reason that I say that is that you're always going to have a situation where a client comes back once they start seeing what it is that you're building, and they say, "Whoa, that's not quite right," which means that you're really engaged already engaged in a hybrid, more agile kind of process. Now, some people may disagree with me, and I know that there are lots of shops that have had a lot of success working in a waterfall methodology, but I tend to think that it doesn't work that well for Drupal projects, and that's because of community code. You can find yourself in a position where somebody has released a set of modules that do very much what you need for the client, and you install them, and they work great, and suddenly you're managing to compress your timeline. Likewise, you can install a group of modules that you think that you're going to use and then find something is conflicting, and then you got to go through a whole series of debugging to figure out why it's not working the way that you expect it to work, which can then extend your timeline. The other thing about waterfall is that sometimes it depends on the situation that you're in, but it can often make devs feel like they're not inclusive in the process. And the more that your developers feel like they're included in the process, the more engaged they are, and the more they will own those portions of the project. And you're going to end up having people who are far more willing to take the extra steps, go the extra mile, do the extra hours if need be, in order to get a project completed. You can get into a situation where developers feel like they're order takers rather than creative members of the team, and that's a pitfall that you don't want to fall into. You get people who are disengaged. You don't get nearly as good a product at the end when that happens. So this is an experience that we had at Examiner. You felt like maybe things were going fairly well in Waterfall, but then because of changes in the middle of the project and the desire for the client to have things being displayed quickly, so they had things to look at, you suddenly feel like you're on a jet plane that's out of control. I certainly felt a good portion of the time that it was plan but hurry up, plan but hurry up, plan but hurry up. And I don't think that works all that well. So then we get into Agile, and Agile requires that we weave, that we move, that we're flexible, and that there's predictability in a single time box as to what the deliverables are. Agile doesn't mean the client can suddenly say at any time, "Oh no, that's not right. I want to do something else." What it means is that you're defining short sprints, and you're saying, in this period of time, this is what we're going to accomplish. You have defined time boxes. You work in iterative development methods. That means that as you build things, as you prototype things, you'll rapidly iterate on those prototypes depending on what the feedback is that you get from the client. And in some cases, you may actually throw a chunk of code out entirely because it doesn't fit their needs. It's incremental, and it tends to be collaborative. And this is where developers really get engaged and really end up becoming invested in a project. Within multiple time boxes, it puts you in a place where you can be rapid and flexible and responsive to change. And I think the last point is almost the most important, that when you're in an agile environment, your teams are self-organizing. The developers sit down and they say, "Oh, I want to do this." And another developer says, "Oh, I want to do this piece." And you take a look at your time box, and eventually you figure out who's going to do what, with the project management team ensuring that nobody's taking on too much or too little. So, to recap that chunk, Cowboy Fast can cause problems with expectation gaps between business and team. It can be volatile. Waterfall, slow. Change is inevitable, which makes for rough situations sometimes. Requirements often fight what Drupal does naturally if you don't have folks who know Drupal writing the requirements. Developers become order takers, not active participants. So phase 3 of this is I'm going to talk about Agile hybrid approach that we ended up developing at Examiner. This is going to be pretty high level. I'm not going to get into nitty-gritty details, but folks are welcome to talk to me about the details after the presentation if you'd like. So I like this slide. It is how one group sees another group. And what I found across four different companies is when you get into the situation where team members are fractured, they're not communicating well, they don't feel invested. You get factions of groups. So you've got developers who see designers as babies in a bunch of paint, and you've got developers who see designers as designers who see developers as being big babies, and the whole 9 yards. You don't want that to happen. You want the team to be cohesive, and when you get into this situation, there's no traction. You don't have any traction any longer. There's a lack of trust. And there's frustration amongst folks across different departments, and that can actually ooze out into your client's vision of who you are as well. It makes for not high-functioning teams. So, one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to develop a process that would work for everybody across the team. And what this really means is that you have to have everybody involved in making the decisions of how you're going to operate. Everybody needs to have input, and everybody needs to have buy-in, because if you've got one bad apple, it kind of makes the whole house of cards fall apart. Everybody has expertise, and they can bring that expertise to the table from the get-go, and that's really important. So, in the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about how in the 90s a number of commercial flights, quite a few, more than average, started crashing. There was no reason from a technical standpoint why this was happening. There was no reason from an environmental standpoint. They weren't flying into hurricanes or anything like that. So as it was being investigated as to what was going on, it turned out that communications were constrained by the rules of social hierarchy. First officers and engineers weren't talking to the captain because they had the expectation that they weren't supposed to talk to the captain. They didn't feel at ease to speak directly to them and talk about concerns. So planes were going down because people with expertise who could advise weren't advising. They weren't speaking up. They weren't being heard. One of the strengths of Agile is that it is flat. Everybody's equal. Everybody has a say. When you're working in Agile, anybody who's on the team is allowed to write user stories based on the business requirements. Everybody is supposed to be listened to. So it's really critical that you start creating an environment where everybody feels comfortable offering suggestions, and this puts us in a place where it's much easier to identify risks and then unblock problems. It's really important to have communication via scrums. So every morning, having a 15-minute stand-up where you just go through each project really quickly that you're working on. No more than 15 minutes is really important. And then retrospectives and demos at the end of the sprints are often overlooked, but I think are critical to the process. You want to have a culture that eliminates blame, where people can own mistakes, and that they are asking for feedback, and that they feel like they're being listened to, and that when they have when other people are speaking, that they're being listened to as well. So I'm going to talk about 4 different roles that we had there. The first was the project management team. In our case, these guys acted as scrum masters. They led in pointing out projects. And pointing out projects just means figuring out how long something is going to take, how difficult it is. They were responsible for protecting the dev team from distractions during coding sprints. As we get into the timeline, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And their job was to ensure that the team didn't make mistakes. It's really common for developers to have the most rosy picture of how long it's going to take for a given chunk of functionality to be completed. And you need to have in your head a sort of factor. This developer consistently takes 20% longer than they think that they're going to take. In a few cases, you'll have developers who actually work faster than they expect. But you need to start thinking about, how long is this actually going to take, and protecting your team from making commitments that they can't follow through on. And then finally, the project management team managed the schedule. Yeah. So in Agile, rather than talking about hours or days, you're talking about story points. So you're identifying how tough something's going to be. And a point is a weird thing. It can talk about difficulty, but it also can talk about time at the same time. And there are lots of really great books on how to point user stories for Agile. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So then the second group were the product team. Now, the product team owns the backlog. The backlog is a long list of features that ultimately you're going to build. And they would write the personas, epics, and stories. A persona is basically who it is that's going to use the site and how they're going to use it, and what their perceptions are going to be of the site. Epics are like sort of overreaching stories, and then stories are one sentence. As a site visitor, I want to be able to register for a newsletter. That would be a simple story. We don't want the product people trying to write requirements because they're not very good at it. But they are very good at identifying what the business needs are. So then the other thing the product team needs to do is clarify business needs. So if the story doesn't make any sense, the project team needs to work with the product team to make sure that they get to a place where it does make sense. And then finally, the product team should be demoing the software at the end of the sprint. Developers self-organize the selected stories in a given sprint. They figure out who's going to do what, when they're going to do it. They decide what can and can't fit into a given time box. So if you empower your development team to say, you know what, we can finish this amount of stuff, but not this amount of stuff, you're typically going to find yourself in a place where they meet those expectations consistently. Then they define the implementation of those business needs. So you don't have a situation where you've got folks outside the development team who are trying to tell the development team how to design the software. You're looking at business needs and trusting that the development team are going to implement on those business needs effectively. And then finally, they execute. So I'm going to talk now a bit about a 20-day sprint. That's a 4-week sprint. You can easily break this into a 2-week sprint. I've done both. They both have different advantages and different shortcomings. But for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to talk about a 4-week sprint. A 4-week sprint isn't just the developers writing code. I like to talk about a 60-40-20 ratio. 60 days out, I want for the business to be thinking about what it is that they want to have built in the future. I want them to be thinking of, in general, what direction the ship is going to be going in, and communicating with the product team as to how, when they'd like to see in general these features get developed. 40 days out, you've got your product team who are writing stories, creating the artifacts like wireframes and comps to support those stories, and getting the project team and the development team to a greater and lesser extent being involved in asking questions and so forth. So you get a nice long backlog of user stories that are completed with artifacts. And then the current 20 days is where we're actually engaged in the sprint, the coding of what it is that we're building. So the product creative timeline looks a little bit like this. Those first 2 days that are green are planning days. Those are devoted to the development team. And basically during those 2 days, the product team has to be involved in helping clarify any last questions that the development team has had in the previous sprint having to do with this set of functionality that's being built. After those first 2 days, the team goes into days 3 through 12, where the product folks are engaged in writing the stories for the next sprint and taking care of developing the artifacts, comps, wireframes, and so forth. And then when you look at days 13 through 18, those are meetings, finalizing comps, delivery of the epics and the stories, and then on day 19, they have to lock down the time box. They have to say, okay, this is what we're doing next time around. You don't want, once the lockdown occurs, you don't want there to be shift. You want the time box that you're currently in to be fixed. So you've got predictability for everybody across the team. And then on the last day there, it's demo and retrospective. And the product team would demo the current software that's just been built. So then you've got the development team. The first 2 days, they're asking questions, they're clarifying, They're putting together their technical architectures. They're making sure that they're talking amongst themselves to ensure that they're engaged in the most efficient way of developing that chunk of functionality, whether it's custom code or contributed modules or a combination of the two. After the first 2 days, and their days 3 through 12 are head down to the ground, they're coding. And during that period of time, the project management team is acting as defense. They're making sure that the developers aren't getting tapped on the shoulder and questions are being asked of them by by other folks in the team, because those kinds of distractions are really expensive. You don't want your developers during that period of time to be engaged in context switching. You want them to be thinking only about what they should be doing during that sprint. Days 13 through 18 is the time that the functionality that they've built is being debugged, tested, etc. And it's also the time where they have a chance to talk to the product team and the project management team about the next sprint. What are the stories that are coming up? And this doesn't make sense to me, and so on. And then on day 19, deployment, and then day 20, demo and retrospective. It's really important that to understand that these three sets of sprints are overlapping. So you've got the business that are thinking about what they want in the future. You've got the product team who are and the designers, etc., who are thinking about what's going to happen next, and you've got the development team who are doing what's happening now. So that it ends up looking a little bit like this, where everything's overlapping. Yeah. Typically, each of the teams, 2 developers, 1 themer, project manager, and a QA person. So fairly small teams. Yeah. This was for a 4-week sprint. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How occupied are the developers?
They're very occupied because they're looking at the stories for the next sprint, and they're fixing bugs as the QA team identifies bugs. But one of the things that I found was that when you can get developers into a cycle where they're doing slightly different things over periods of time, they stay fresh and they stay engaged. If you have them doing nothing but coding all the time, they start to lose their edge. So it's a good way of keeping things sort of mixed up. Yeah.
So are you saying that during before development sprint, the developers are also sort of engaged in maybe code reviews of each other?
Absolutely. Peer review is critical. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that we did was we then took all of these deadlines that you see in here, and the project management team would assign these in Google Calendar to each of the people that had deliverables. So they would automatically start getting pinged a day before. This is what you've got due tomorrow, and the idea behind that was to make sure that the artifacts, the stories, the epics, the comps, the wireframes, all of these things are getting done when they need to get done. Yeah.
Maybe I got you wrong, but doesn't that contradict the purpose of having a self-organized team?
Well, the self-organized team are looking at the current stories and deciding. The developers are deciding who's going to do what and when. In terms of producing your user stories to begin with, and producing the wireframes and comps and so forth. The product team and the design team have to work together in terms of that and identify who's going to do what. And the project management team, their responsibility at that point is to make sure that all of that's being scheduled correctly. But you may have one designer who says, "Oh, I want to do this piece of the next sprint." That's also, you end up having fairly self-organized teams there as well. Yeah. So that brings us to demos and retrospectives. If you start using an agile methodology, don't let the higher ups in the company tell you that demos and retrospectives aren't valuable. I think that one of the things that you'll find with a demo is that it helps everybody know what everybody else was working on, and in the future that pays dividends because somebody may have worked on a chunk of functionality that applies to another project, to another client in the future. And because the demos occurred, it gets sort of into the culture and the ethos of the entire company as to the kinds of things that have been worked on. It also means that everybody knows what the status is of a given project at a given time. So there's sort of check-ins across the company. It builds respect because people like to show what they've done. They like to be proud of what they've worked on. And it lets folks know who to ask questions of and who to go to in terms of learning how to use a given chunk of the product if need be. Directly after a demo, it's a really good idea to have a retrospective. Traditionally, these are called postmortems. I hate that word because people aren't dying. So I like to call them retrospectives, where you look back at your Timebox and you talk about what worked and what didn't work. And it needs to be a safe environment where everybody feels like they can discuss what worked and what didn't work. But at that point, you can then iterate your process and improve your process. So each sprint, each Timebox becomes better and better and better and smoother and smoother and smoother. During the retrospective, also, the project management team is held accountable for any problems that had been discussed in the previous sprint if they haven't been addressed in the current sprint. So that gives you a sense of sort of the timing across the sprint. If you take this down to a daily level, it's important to have daily scrums. And that's literally 15 minutes. You get up, talk about what you did in the last 24 hours, what are you going to do in the next 24 hours, and what are your blockers. Once you've identified what the blockers are, you don't want the team talking about them in that meeting. You want them to break off into groups of people that can solve those problems outside of the scrum. You want it to be fast and then over. So, tools. I'm going to talk about tools for a few minutes. It's really important that you not get yourself into a position where you believe that the tools are what define your process. You want to have a strong process in place to begin with, and then have the tools support that process. All the companies that I've worked for have been highly distributed. Even the ones that were bricks and mortar were highly distributed, or they acted as if they were highly distributed for a variety of different reasons. As a culture, Drupal operates in IRC a great deal. Even bricks and mortar companies, the team members will be communicating in IRC. And it would be really great for you to talk to your system administrator if you haven't already to get Morbus If's bot module installed, so it's logging the IRC channel that you're working within to a Drupal instance, so you can go back and you can take a look at the communications that have been going on. One of the things that I do every day and have for 6 years is I'll do a rapid scan of the previous day's logs to see what people were talking about, to see whether there were any issues that need to be addressed that folks aren't bringing up. It's just a really good practice. And then, of course, Skype for communication via voice. In my current job, we're starting to use Google Hangouts a whole lot, and they're great. One of the reasons that they're so powerful is that it's not just video chat. You also have an IRC-style chat sort of on the left-hand side, and you can screen share in ways that you can't do in groups in Skype. So you might want to check out Hangouts if you haven't. It's a pretty great communication tool. Also, Google Docs are really handy. So what you see here is a list of user stories. The user stories that are green are ones that have been completed. The user stories that are yellow are ones that are currently being worked on. And the areas that are pink are identifying where questions have emerged from the team, questions that need to be answered. Across this Google Doc, you'll see that there's story ID, priority, where the artifacts live for this particular story, the actual story itself, any notes that are there, feedback, links to comps, timing of when it's going to occur, ticket numbers, level of effort, who the lead dev, themer, QA, product person is going to be. This was a really effective way when we were using Track. Track has, in terms of ticketing. When we migrated the team from Track to Jira with Greenhopper, which is another ticket management system. Greenhopper makes it great for doing Agile projects, and we actually got rid of the Google Docs entirely because we were able to do the same thing natively within Jira with Greenhopper. But still, this is a good way of managing the stories within a given sprint. Single place, you can see what the stories are. You can put in your questions. So, other tools that sort of sit in the toolbox. I've talked about Track a little bit. Some kind of repository. You want to make sure that you're using a repository. GitHub is great. We use Skitch pretty heavily because we're a Drupal shop, a Mac shop. Skitch is so you can do screenshots and they can be assigned to tickets and so forth. So you've got visual representations of what you're looking at. Our DevOps folks were using Jenkins for doing deployments. Basically, Jenkins is a wrapper around scripts. So you can script all of your different DevOps types of things and then use Jenkins to run those scripts in a predictable way. Different Google documents. We use Drupal for logging our IRC channels, Jing for doing video on problems that you might be seeing. Same with ScreenFlow, and then Jira as well. Started using Google Hangouts, like I said. Join Me as well, which is another good screen sharing piece of software. It's free. And again, the IRC channels. What happened for us is that we went from being fractured and being ineffective to being a highly cohesive group that was getting work done much faster, much more efficiently, with a higher degree of quality when we moved out of working in a waterfall methodology into a more agile methodology. And it put us in a place where we weren't overburdened by specific requirements, that we knew what the general needs were of the business, and then those general needs were interpreted by the development team and then executed by the development team in that fashion. I think that it put that team in a place where we were delivering what the business needed, not necessarily what they expected, but what they needed, and it also allowed us to rapidly iterate on pieces of functionality. So that's the end of my presentation, my remarks. We've got a few minutes for questions. If folks have questions. Yeah. Go ahead and use the microphone. I think the microphone is, yeah.
So, first question is around QA team.
Is it on?
Okay. Can everyone hear me now?
Yeah,
My
I can do that.
question is around, you go ahead, repeat the question.
Yeah.
Around the QA team, are they writing test cases or are your developers writing test cases? I saw you using Jenkins.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're putting your test cases in Jenkins or continuous integration?
The test cases weren't being put into Jenkins, but simple tests were being written. So there's test-driven development that was going on. So the tests were being written before the code was actually being written. But at the same time, the QA team were developing test cases for testing the UI and the UX after the fact, and also putting together regression tests for the entire site. So each development cycle, each sprint, a full regression could be done of the site prior to pushing the next set of code to production. Some of it was manual, some of it was using Selenium. So it was a variety of different kinds of efforts that were being taken on that. So there were written test cases, the simple tests that had been written, and then Selenium tests that had been developed as well.
The reason I was asking that is because there's a debate in our company about what the quality of QA engineers is supposed to be. Are they the people who can be competent to review code
Mm-hmm.
and write Selenium test cases, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they people who are not that competent as developers and are more like
Sure.
taking an acceptance criteria and testing what the developers are asking them to do?
Sure.
You see what I'm
Yeah, for sure. In our case, the QA team were not developers. They were individuals who had experience in writing test cases, but not necessarily reviewing code. And because there's heavy peer review going on through the whole process, it was that level of QA was being done by the development team themselves. One more, and then we'll go on to. Oh, yeah.
What's your opinion on paired programming?
Oh, paired programming is great if you've got the time for it. A, because it takes a little bit longer. B, when you're working with junior developers, it's fabulous. It's a great experience to have a senior developer working directly with a more junior developer. I think the challenge is really if you're in a very, very tight time crunch. Sometimes it's easier for a developer to simply take on the task and then hand off their code for peer review after the fact. But I'm a fan of paired programming. I think it's good.
Because I mean, if you're in a pressed time, if you're pressed time-wise, maybe that single developer bites their tail if it's like a really high risk project, like maybe a bank or something like that. I mean.
Sure. So if you're dealing with banking, you don't want to be doing Agile. Like you don't. You want to because you don't want scope creep in that instance at all. You want all of your requirements up front because you make one mistake, you're up the creek. So if you're talking about something like that, I wouldn't recommend using Agile. I would go right back to a waterfall process, and I would be doing a heck of a lot of prototyping and paper prototyping to begin with, so they know exactly what it is that they're getting, and you get sign off at every single step. But yeah, I wouldn't. Anything that's dealing with money like that. It's.
I imagine two really senior guys sitting together,
Yeah.
like motivating everything they're doing.
Sure.
Something like that.
Sure. Yeah, you can use two senior guys together as well in paired programming, and that works really well. If you're talking about having them sort of bounce ideas off of one another. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You said earlier that you wouldn't expect the business to write the requirements because they're not committed.
Yeah.
Can you clarify what you mean by that? Like, who should be writing the requirements?
Sure. So the question was, I made a statement that certain members of business aren't great at writing requirements. Who should be writing the requirements? So I would break this up into different kinds of requirements. When you're talking about the business needs, the business requirements, absolutely. having some kind of narrative that explains what it is that the business is looking for should be written by the product team in conjunction with the leadership of the company. What I'm talking about is when you get to a point where you're talking about how to actually execute on those needs. So you have your business requirements to begin with, and then the product team takes those business requirements and writes their user stories based on what leadership has indicated that they want. Leadership signs off on those user stories and epics, and at that point, it's handed off to the development team who look at the user stories, and they're the ones that do the technical requirements based on the user stories. That's what I was talking about.
So a requirement of, there has to be, it has to support 1,000 concurrent users, non-anonymous users.
Mm-hmm.
Based on what you're saying, it sounds like that's not something that comes from the business, but
The business can say it needs to support 1,000 concurrent users, but the business can't say this is how we want you to do it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. Sure. So the question is, can this work on multiple projects with smaller teams? Yeah, it's a little rougher. It's a little harder. The trick is to try as much as possible to encapsulate those individual small teams on single projects. So you're not trying to have competing interests engaged with one another across projects. That's actually one of the things that we're working on at Trellin right now to figure out how best to implement this kind of process, and understanding that we may have anywhere from 10 to 12 projects that are currently running at various levels of completion. It can be done. Certainly have been successful in other shops in the past, but it's a little tougher for sure. Yeah, absolutely. How do we what? Oh, how the question is, how do we sell Agile to clients? So there are a couple of ways that it can be done. There are a number of high-profile shops that do just that. They sell sprints. They don't sell requirements. They don't, they'll look at requirements and they'll say, we think it'll take about this amount of time. But then they sell sprints. So they say, you've got 2 weeks, and you've got 2 developers and a themer and a project manager, and we'll help you identify what we're going to do in each of those sprints, and then they sell those sprints. And when the client says, we're done, then they're done. When you're talking about fixed bid projects, the way that I approach it is I don't talk about Agile. I don't talk about sprints. They don't get it often. They're looking for specific results. We may act in a sprint fashion. We may behave as a team in a sprint fashion. And what we'll end up doing is saying to the client, we need you to take part in 15-minute daily conversations to clarify issues as needed. We need you to take part at the end of each 2-week period in a review of the work that we've done. So you approach it in a different way. You don't end up talking about Agile and Scrum and sprints and so on, because I think it's a foreign concept to a lot of clients who just want their website built. Yes, sir. Yeah. Sure. The question is, one of the slides talked about how Cowboy can damage relationships with stakeholders. So the whole notion of Cowboy is that you're working in a small team that doesn't have any set requirements, that have a vague idea of what it is that you're building, and then you go and you rapidly iterate, right? And if you've got a tight team that are all on the same page and they're doing prototyping, that works really well. But if you've got stakeholders who are outside of that tight little team, who are perhaps maybe a client, or if it's a company that you're working within that have their own website that you're working on, you can miss expectations completely because they're separated from the process. And a cowboy requires you to be highly engaged in the process all the time. And once you start missing those expectations, it damages trust, and that'll ultimately damage those relationships. And once you lose trust, you're sunk. The question is, have I ever seen that happen? Absolutely, 100%. I've seen trust get destroyed, and teams become dysfunctional because of those missed expectations. Yes. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question. You didn't mention velocity.
Sure.
But I don't need to go too deep in that, but I can just mention a scenario. The human resources, when you make these schedules for the sprints,
Mm-hmm.
actually you really never know how they will look in like 2 weeks. I mean, you can start a project,
Yep.
and so the developers, maybe they catch the flu, and
Mhm.
they're under the weather for like
Yep.
a week, and then you can't get all of the user stories you planned from the beginning, maybe, and then your schedule didn't really adapt to that. If you do it in like Google Docs, you have to move stuff around like a lot, and do a lot of replanning. And do you have any idea how to tackle that?
Sure. So the question is, in instances where unpredictability of people's lives, like getting the flu, disrupt a sprint, how do you adjust for that? So in Google Docs, I agree with you. It's a lot harder to shuffle things around. If you're using a tool like Jira with Greenhopper, you can pull tasks out of a given sprint and move them into the next sprint, and it'll automatically readjust your velocity. The whole notion of velocity is that there's a certain speed at which you can complete tasks, and it goes back to the points. And if you've got fewer user points available to the team during a given sprint unexpectedly, then your velocity is slowing down significantly. Using Google Docs, I mean, what we would do is we'd gray out. We would gray out on the doc any stories that we had decided we weren't going to address at this time, and then it would end up in another tab, and the product team would literally copy and paste those grayed out stories to the next sprint.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. There was a gentleman back there actually.
We follow roughly the same approach as you do. So we have development and testing and then demo.
Yeah.
What we're struggling with is after demo we start the next sprint, so that's when the end user starts playing with the product. They always find bugs larger or smaller. How do you go with that?
Sure. So the question was when after the demo and the end user starts playing with the product, how do you deal with change requests, bugs, etc.? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
So there are two ways that we've addressed that. The first is that change requests get put into the backlog and are prioritized by the leadership team in whatever sprint they decide they want those changes to be put in place. For bugs during the QA period in the next sprint, provided it isn't a critical bug, it's addressed during those days that were yellow on that slide. If it's critical, then we may be in a position where we're saying, okay, we have to pull this resource off for this amount of time to complete these tasks. That was disruptive when we first started doing it, but we ended up building a rapid response team. So there were each sprint there would be 1 or 2 individuals who would be devoted to bug fixes and so forth. And that actually ended up working really, really well for us. All right, I think that we've run out of time. If people want to chat with me, feel free to grab me in the hallway or whatnot. I'm friendly. And if you wouldn't mind making sure that you put feedback, that'd be fabulous. I'd appreciate it. And my slides are up on the page that had the description of the session at this point, I believe, and my contact information's in there. So feel free to reach out. Happy to chat with you. Thanks, everybody. Hey, you?
Speaking of things.
Yeah.